Welcome to Empowered. I'm Elizabeth Naumovski. Are women better or worse investors than men? And what is the wealth gap and how does it affect us? And what about the wage gap? Is it hurting women? And what about pink tax? Today's guest has a mission to empower women to confidently and profitably grow their wealth through financial feminism. Today, I'm joined by Janine Rogan, a chartered professional accountant and author of The Pink Tax, Dismantling a Financial System Designed to Keep Women Broke. And she's also CEO of the Wealth Building Academy. Janine, welcome to Empowered. Thank you for being here today.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm really excited for our conversation today.
I am as well. And I have to ask you, I want to begin with the name of your book, The Pink Tax. On the cover, the subline is Dismantling a Financial System Designed to Keep Women Broke. This is a very powerful statement, and I think it's true. And however, I'm just wondering, how have people responded to you about this?
Yeah, I think there's always going to be two camps of people. So most people have been very supportive and understand the impact of the systemic issues that impact women's bank accounts. But of course, there's always going to be some detractors around believing that the wage gap or the wealth gap isn't real, or that I'm making up statistics, even though, there's over 200 sources in the book. So usually those people, though, are not my target audience. Hopefully one day I'll change their minds, but I would say overall it's been really positive.
So as you know, the show is educational. So I want to go through a few different phrases with you. Let's begin with, what is the wealth gap?
Yeah, the wealth gap really looks at the discrepancy in wealth between two groups of people. So this could be a gendered wealth gap, so between men and women, how much wealth men have versus women. And we know that white women have just 30% of the worldwide wealth compared to white men. And it can also be intersectional. So you may have a gendered wealth gap that also looks at people of color. So people of color have just 2% of the worldwide wealth. And this can be sliced and diced a whole bunch of different ways. It could be millennials versus baby boomers. You name it, you can kind of look at the wealth gap from a variety of different lenses.
So I want to talk about wealth. When women have wealth, what can they actually do with it?
Yeah, wealth is power at the end of the day. And I think that that's something that we need to remind ourselves of more often. So when I'm talking about power, though, I mean like power to impact change in our community, in our governments, power and impact to invest in women-led businesses, if that's something that you're interested in, or even just to be able to purchase from small businesses that you care about. Sometimes those products can be more expensive, but if you have wealth, you have the power to do those things.
And so we're going to go back to another term, the wage gap. What is the wage gap?
Yeah, the wage gap talks about the difference that people are paid for their work that they do. So we know that, again, white women earn just 84 cents on the dollar compared to white men, and then women of color, it's just 62 cents. And again, any intersectionality we add, we know that that wage gap gets bigger.
It's really interesting because this has been happening forever. And I'm surprised that we haven't caught up to, 2023, where, wages are equal for equal pay for equal work. I mean, this is what we've been talking about for a very long time. It doesn't seem to be closing anytime soon. What are your thoughts about that?
Yeah, it's unfortunate that, I feel like I'm battling the same things that my mom's generation battled. But I think it won't change until we create laws and policies to do that, because I don't think there are enough companies that are going to do it out of the goodness of their heart. There are countries around the world that are doing really great things. Iceland, for example, mandates that companies, have to include their wage gap data in their kind of financial reporting. And if they don't, they're actually fined daily. So creating fines or legislative requirements is one way that we can absolutely look to starting to close that wage gap. But yeah, I don't think it's going to close just out of the goodness of anybody's heart.
It's funny that you brought up your mother. I was doing a speech. I was saying a speech at one point, and I was saying that, my mother had to struggle with lower wages. My mother had to struggle with not having childcare. And the only difference from then to now is that, she was washing diapers and now you can just buy them. And we didn't have cell phones. So we're going to keep talking about the wage gap. So please don't go away. We'll be right back with Janine Rogan. Welcome back to Empowered. I'm Elizabeth Naumovski. Today's episode, we're focusing on closing the wealth gap and the wage gap and understanding the pink tax, dismantling a financial system designed to keep women broke. Janine, before we went away, we were talking about the wage gap and the wealth gap. What role do men have in closing the wage and wealth gap?
I love this question, and I get asked it quite a bit. I think that everybody has a role in closing the wage and the wealth gap. And one of the ways that men can do this is actually by sharing their salary information with their female colleagues or women in their life. I actually experienced quite a bit of wage discrimination when I was working as an accountant in a previous role. And I was actually training a man who ended up being paid $13,000 more than I was, and we were in the same role. And I never would have known to ask for that level of salary if he hadn't shared that to me. And unfortunately, I don't remember his name, but it was something that was so impactful to me and my career.
And you know what? I think we all go through that. When we do find out that one of our male counterparts is making a lot more money, it's an aha moment for us. It's like, well, what's happening here and why? So what can women do individually to help move themselves forward financially?
Yeah, there are lots of things that women can do from a financial perspective, but I'll focus on kind of two really key areas. The first is negotiating. And I think that it's so important that women get involved with negotiating and practice negotiating. So not just once a year at your salary review, but practice negotiating your credit card interest rate or your bank fees or more data on your cell phone. These are small ways that people can practice and get comfortable negotiating so that when it comes time to the big negotiation, you have the confidence to do so. And also you're coming with a lot of data around, what other markets are paying for these types of roles, all of your accomplishments. I think those are some really key areas when it comes to negotiating. And the second part is I'm a big, big advocate of women investing. We know women don't invest as much as men. We're more risk averse. I like to say also we're more risk aware, but we know that 70% of women are keeping their money in cash. And that can be really detrimental to women's wealth building over the long term, especially because on average, the stock market returns about 10% per year. So if you're not seeing those types of returns or you don't have your money in investments, you're losing out over the long term.
Okay, so now you touched upon two really important things. I want to go back to negotiating because I was never taught how to negotiate. My mother always said, ask questions. When you don't know, ask questions because, you need to understand what's happening here. I had Rita Turcher on the show. She was the first guest on Empowered. And she said that when she had, she was up for a new job, she went to a friend of hers and said, teach me how to negotiate like a white man. There's so many important things that we as women don't know. And I want to talk about chapter 16 of your book.
Okay.
My favorite chapter, Ask for More. We need to negotiate, yet we don't. So what can we do to become better negotiators for ourselves?
Yeah, and we know that women aren't received as well when they negotiate, unfortunately. So there is some bias working against us that we do really need to work on as a society. But when you're preparing for negotiations, I would say if it's a salary negotiation, like know your numbers, know what other people in the industry are being paid, know what your coworkers are being paid, have that list of all of those amazing accomplishments and try and have like a numeric driver along with those. And then kind of like what your mother said, like asking open-ended questions. How can we get to a point where it is continuing to be sustainable for me to work here at the current salary? Or, what can we do to look at making this more appealing or make it so that it works for both of us? Because sometimes employers can't move on, let's say, base salary. So can you ask for another week of vacation or more stock if it's a publicly traded company? And there's also great resources out there. I have a good friend, Fotini Economopoulos, wrote the book Say Less, Get More. Amazing negotiation tips, and it's an entire book dedicated to that. So there are so many great Canadian resources out there that also aren't just coming from white men, because sometimes the things white men say or how they would negotiate don't always work for the rest of us as well.
You know, you mentioned Fotini. When I read your book, I was like, oh, she's going to be the next one of the next guests that I have on the
That's
show.
awesome.
Because you know what? I want people to understand what's happening with women worldwide, within Canada, because we all need to learn from each other. When we come back from this commercial break, I want to talk about the fact that, you know, we shouldn't keep our cash in the bank, and we should use it for us. So please don't go away. We'll be right back. Welcome back to Empowered. I'm Elizabeth Naumovski. Today's episode, we're focusing on closing the wealth gap, the wage gap, and understanding the pink tax, dismantling a financial system designed to keep women broke. So, Janine, before we went to break, you talked about the fact that, women feel safe when they keep money in the bank, 10,000, 20,000, whatever, 5,000, whatever the number is for them. But, we need to think beyond keeping money in the bank. We make less money than men. We live longer than men. So what would you say to women who are, afraid of losing their money in the stock market, or afraid of investing their money, or just don't know what to do other than be old school and keep their money in a bank account?
Yeah, there's so much to unpack in what you just said. So I think the first thing is I always like to talk about awareness. So why are women keeping their money in cash? Why are they afraid of investing in the stock market? And I really do think that's because women haven't been involved in some of these financial decisions over the past century. It has only been since the 60s that women could have their own bank accounts without a father or a spouse co-signing, and only since the 70s that they could have their own mortgages. So we haven't been involved in these conversations. We haven't really seen a lot of people that are older than us have these things. So we're really just trying to learn and understand. So I think it's always important to come at it with a mindset of like, I'm a beginner at this and that's okay. I wasn't taught it in school. If you're scared of the stock market, I would say that if you are in a well-diversified portfolio that is going to be a long-term investment, if the stock market were to go to zero tomorrow, as a society, we would have a lot bigger problems. So I don't think that's happening anytime soon. Like, we would have to completely shut down the economy and capitalism and go down the road of maybe the barter system. But I do think it's important to understand that you're right. We are paid less, and then we're hit with the costs of being a woman. So in addition to like the gendered pricing of the pink tax, there are just other areas where it's more expensive to be a woman. I mean, I dye my hair. I know women's haircuts are more expensive, makeup, all of those things that it costs to be a woman, pardon me, just amplify the fact that we have less money. And so if we don't invest, we're never going to get to that point of financial independence. And not investing over the course of your life could cost you over $1 million. And I think when we start to think about it in those terms, it can be a real wake-up call for people.
Yeah, those terms are it's a staggering number. And yeah, it is a wake-up call. So let's go back to the pink tax. I know it was a phrase that was coined in the 70s. What exactly is the pink tax?
Yeah, in the 70s, it was coined as the price difference between gendered products. So go into a Shoppers Drug Mart or any grocery store or pharmacy and look at shavers or shampoo, and you'll notice that oftentimes the women's product is more expensive, or if they're the same price, the volume is less for the women's product. And so basically anything that's like pink branded is more expensive. And this can extend to like children's helmets and bikes. I've seen it where the pink bike is $100 more than the blue bike, for example. But it is kind of very insidious how much it is actually in the very fabric of our society.
So, I mean, you are a financial feminist, but I really want to know deep down inside, why did you write the book, The Pink Tax?
Yeah. So I've been in this space for about 13 years, and I hustled really hard in my 20s. I worked really hard. I invested. But about 5 years ago, I got to the point where I felt like the personal finance community was saying, women don't have the same level of wealth because they buy too many shoes, or lattes are the reason that we can't retire, and avocado toast is why we can't buy a house. And I just sat with that and I was like, that can't be it. Like, that can't be the reason that we have only 30% of the worldwide wealth. And that's really what led me into the research around this. And I just felt that there was so many kind of personal finance books and blogs out there teaching you how to do it, but none were really taking that gendered approach and looking at critically, like, what systems do we have set up in our society that are hindering women or hindering intersectional people from building wealth. And that's not to say there's nothing we can do. There absolutely are things we can do, but awareness is always the first step.
You know what? I thought it was a great read. I read your book. I wrote
Thank you.
things, and you're welcome. I think it's a must read for everyone, especially if you want to understand money, understand your spending, understand what an RRSP is, or a tax-free savings account. It's a must read for everyone. So please don't go away. We'll be right back, and we're going to talk about unpaid care work. Welcome back to Empowered. I'm Elizabeth Naumovski. On today's episode, we're focusing on closing the wealth gap and wage gap in understanding pink tax. I'm joined by Janine Rogan, a chartered professional accountant, author of The Pink Tax, Dismantling a Financial System Designed to Keep Women Broke. And she's also the CEO of the Wealth Building Academy. Before we went to break, I'd mentioned unpaid care work, and you talk about this in the book. Would you please explain it?
Absolutely. Unpaid care work is something that is critical to understanding why women have less wealth. And as a society, in the Western world, we've decided that care work is not something that we're going to really add a monetary value to. So unpaid care work would be child rearing, taking care of an elder or maybe a sick spouse. And I know that sometimes people say, like, well, that's kind of your role when you agree to have children and have a spouse. But these are oftentimes things that are actually would be like paid positions in a lot of other societies. And it actually ends up hindering women's ability to be part of the economic workforce.
You know, I talked about this when I spoke at the at the Empire Club of Canada in June 2020. And I was afraid that I was wrong, when I was making this statement. Why do you believe childcare is imperative to women's economic equality?
So we know that as soon as a woman has a child, her earnings go down. This is known as the motherhood penalty. Financially, actually, one of the worst choices a woman can make for her money and her career is to have a kid. And I'm saying that as a mom of an almost 3-year-old. So I'm not telling anyone to not have children if they want to. But it is so critical because if we don't have that care work taken, or if we don't have that daycare or that care available to us, it's impossible for us to kind of go back to work and be part of the economy and actually earn our own money. So without affordable and accessible daycare for children under the age of 6 before they go to school, it really impacts women's ability to be in the workforce. And we know that in the pandemic, 1 in 5 women actually left the workforce because of caregiving reasons. And that brought us back down to labor participation levels that we saw in 1981. So it really sets women back when we don't have care available for our children.
Yeah, we went back so many years during that pandemic. I want to talk about women talking about and having money. It's often seen as a bad or taboo thing in society. Why is it such a taboo thing? I mean, you should be proud of the fact that you understand money and you have some of it.
Yeah, I mean, the cynic in me would say it's kind of the patriarchy's way to keep women dependent on men. I think also that there has been so much bias over the years and non-involvement from women's perspectives that we're just not comfortable talking about it. And our society does us no favors, and neither does the media, right? If you're a woman who wants money, then you're greedy or you're crass. But if you marry a man who has more money than you, then you're a gold digger. So we can't win on either side of it. So I think we just need to blow it all up and step into our ability to earn wealth as our ability to have an impact and have power in the economy that we've built.
So we have about a minute left, and I think this is a really important question. What can we do as a society to help women gain economic equality?
I love this question as well. I think there's so much we can do in looking at who we vote for from an elected official perspective. So looking at what kind of policies they're bringing forward, looking at if their team is diverse, looking at how they talk about women in the media. Last year, I think it was Dr. Jill Biden, so Joe Biden's wife, was called kiddo in the Wall Street Journal. And that's just like not how we talk about women who have their doctorate, or really any woman. But in addition to that, if you're in a position where you can make change within an organization, I think that you have a responsibility to start to create policies that are supportive of women and are supportive of mothers within that corporation.
Thank you so much, Janine. I could talk to you for another 10 hours about this. I think it was an enlightening show, and I really appreciate you being on here today.
Thanks for having me.
Janine says financial feminism means financial equality for all. However, she also says that it'll take 257 years to close the wage gap, which means we should have equal pay by the year 2277. Now, it's a very long haul and unattainable in our lifetime. Remember, we make less money than our male counterparts and we live longer. We need to be smart with our money. I'm Elizabeth Naumovski, and I'm here to empower you and make frugality fashionable. Thank you so much for watching. See you next time. Bye for now.